about humanity. About humanity. It's all about humanity. About humanity. It's all about humanity. It's all about humanity. About humanity. It's all about humanity. About humanity. It's all about humanity.
Did you know? School Sport Victoria offers 650,000 sporting opportunities in 31 different sports at 10,700 events across the state every single year. That's a lot of kids playing sport. And for over 25 years, the Victorian School Sports Awards have recognised more than 1,500 students, teachers and volunteers for excellence and outstanding contribution to school sport. Now that's a champion effort.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Ask SSV show. We hope you're enjoying this beautiful weather. It's not going to stay that way for the rest of the weekend, but we've got the very lovely Dave McNeill with us. How are you, Dave?
Good, thanks, Draft. Thanks for having me.
No, our pleasure, mate. We've been chasing you for a little while and we've already got questions that are starting to roll in, so we better get started. We've got quite a show, but you know, before we start getting into the questions, I want to paint the picture of how decorated you are, because I learn something by every athlete that I interview, and we interview every Friday, but I was a little gobsmacked by the amount of times that you've represented Australia, not even counting national titles. You have several of those national titles, in fact. But just international: 2004 Commonwealth Youth Games, 2010 Commonwealth Games in Delhi, 2011 World Cross Country Championships in Spain, 2012 London Olympics, 2013 World Cross Country Championships again in Poland, 2016 Rio Olympics, 2017 World Cross Country Championships in Uganda, 2018 Commonwealth Games Gold Coast, and 2019 World Cross Country Championships in Denmark. Not only does that say you've got a lot of frequent flyers, but you are a very decorated athlete. How does it feel to have those achievements read back to you?
Yeah, it makes me feel a little old, actually. But no, it's been an absolute privilege to be able to do what I love for so long, and yeah, I've had a lot of fun along the way, and obviously a lot of support to make all of that possible. So really grateful.
I mean, the first time you wore the green and gold was in 2004 for the Commonwealth Youth Games.
Mm.
Going back, that's a long time. That's a span of my maths is failing me right now. It's about 15 years of staying in form. That is remarkable in and of itself. Which of these is the most special to you? Which means the most to you?
I think it's hard to go past the Olympics.
Yeah.
London and Rio were both special for slightly different reasons. London, obviously, because it was my first Olympic team, and I think like a lot of athletes, you have a series of adversities that lead up to that, and I had my fair share, and in some ways it was a bit of a surprise to get there, and then had my family watching in the stadium, so that was pretty special. And then Rio was kind of icing on the cake because we might even touch on this, but the Olympics only happen every 4 years. It's in my case, it's a less than 30-minute window in which you have to get everything right, which you prepare years and years to do. And Rio was probably as close as I could get to getting everything right on the day at the right time in the right race, and ran as close to probably what I was capable of doing in a world-class field. So, and again, I had my family there watching, and it was pretty amazing experience.
That would have been, and obviously the Com Games in the Gold Coast, it was significant for you. Going back to 2004, or going back in general, where did it all start for you?
Good question. Well, I've always been pretty partial to sport. I started off my my love of sport in basketball, and that's what I played from when I was a real young kid, sort of 7 or 8, through till about 15, 16. And I took up running. I stumbled into. I did some school cross country races. Started to do them a little bit more regularly, once I got into high school, and just seemed to kind of improve with each race. And I think that the real turning point for me was when I met my first coach, Tom Kelly, who's unfortunately no longer with us, but he was a remarkable human being, and what he did for me was really, show me the sport was one thing, and two, his passion for the sport really rubbed off on me, and he really fostered what has now become a lifelong love of running, and in large part he's a big reason for why I'm still doing it now, all these years later.
Well, I mean, he's even got a track named after him, Tom Kelly Reserve, which is a remarkable man. Your first Team Vic appearance was in 2001 as a 16-year-old, where you made the cross country. Is that right? You made the cross country. Yeah. What was it like to make the cross country there for the first time? Oh, yeah,
it was real special. I remember qualifying at the state champs at Bundoora, and it wasn't my first state champs, but it was my first state team. And I remember in previous years, not being in the mix to make the team, and seeing the kids ahead of me get their little piece of paper at the finish line and go and try on uniforms. And I remember thinking, oh man, I'd love to do that. And really, it was kind of the product of sticking at it for a few years, and it was a special experience. One, making the team, and then two, wearing the Vic colours and travelling to Perth. That was 19 years ago. I remember, still people that I'm run with or friends with now. Liam Adams was a teammate of mine, and Collis Birmingham was on that team as well. yeah, some people that would later become pretty famous in their own right. It's pretty special.
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right there. And we've had some questions come in that have been pre-submitted, and we've got some on Facebook now that we'll get to. But I just want to talk quickly about Kiara's question. Kiara's from Corio Creek Primary School, and she's asked this. As I'm only starting out my journey, what advice would you give to me now? Now, let's just wind the clock back. Dave's a 10, 11, 12-year-old boy. Kiara's probably around that same age, 10, 12, 11. You know, what advice would you give to yourself and to Kiara and others like her now?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I look at the underlying thing is put yourself in an environment where you're enjoying it. So that's the number one factor. You know, we can talk about, you know, training hard and putting in the work and setting, you know, lofty goals and things like that. But the very first thing that you need to do is enjoy it. Because if you enjoy it, you'll keep doing it, and if you keep doing it, you'll build some consistency. And if you build some consistency, that's when you start to improve, and that's when you start to those goals you start to tick off. You know, the performances get better, your times get better. So I guess the question that leads on from that, well, how do you do that? How do you go about enjoying it? So things that I found important were I joined a group, a training group, a club. So it was first and foremost, it was a social thing for me. I loved going out to Doncaster when I was a young fella and training with Tom and some of the folks there. So that's the first thing. And then, look, I think from there, just, that's all the details, setting goals, getting better. You know, all of that stuff comes second. But first and foremost, put yourself in an environment where you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, the most important aspect, you are absolutely right, is the enjoyment factor. I mean, the enjoyment that underpins everything you do can get you through the hardest times. It's easy to enjoy it when you're winning and you're getting selected for Olympics, but it's difficult when you've got an injury, when things aren't going your way, when you haven't had a personal best, and that enjoyment factor is so important.
Absolutely.
For you, not only have you had to maintain over a long period of time to stay in form, you know, we've established it's 15 years plus, you've also had to foster that fun aspect. Like, I'm not stupid enough to think that every time you hit the track, you would have just loved doing what you do. But what is it that you love about running? What is it that gets you out of bed in the morning or gets you to that training session when you really don't want to be there?
Yeah, look, I think it's probably changed a little bit over the years. You know, just as I've grown up, I've grown up as a runner. So, you know, the things that got me out of bed probably have changed over the years. But look, in general, I absolutely love I love training with the group. So I'm part of the Melbourne Track Club, and ordinarily we'd be meeting up and training at least a couple of times a week, and that's actually been, you know, one of the hard things during 2020, and particularly in Victoria, and being restricted to our movements and so forth. But so just as it was when I was younger, there's a social component to it. I think the longer I've been doing it, there's a certain part of running that is just part of my identity. It's who I am. I'm a runner. And so if I don't run, I don't feel like myself. And if I don't feel like myself, then I'm not the best version of myself for, you know, my friends and family and colleagues and people that I work with. So I'm certainly conscious of that. And inevitably, you know, I have days where it's a struggle to get out the door, and sometimes I just I don't really feel like it, but 99 times out of 100, I feel better afterwards. And I've done it long enough that I know that, and And so that's another part of it. And then I guess thirdly, it's good for my mental health. Exercise is good for your mental health. Getting fresh air, breathing hard, getting your heart rate up. I don't underestimate the contribution that my running makes to my mental health, and certainly in this day and age, that's an important consideration, and it's really great that we can talk about things like that. It wasn't a popular notion or topic to talk about when you're younger, but that's always what it's been. It makes me happy, and that's a good thing all round.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine it would be tough, like you said, to get out the door. But we've had a question come in from Joanne Nasser, and it's kind of along these lines, and I'll pop it onto the screen now. What keeps you focused while running, or how do you stay focused? And let's extend it even further to what's been some of the things that you've put in place to keep you going for 15 years. That's a long time. Yeah,
look, and I think on a day-to-day basis and a run-to-run basis, it varies a little bit. I strongly believe that there are some runs where it's okay not to be focused and just to tick off the Ks. And as a middle and long distance runner, at times I've ticked off 160 to 180 K a week. Perhaps not as much this now, but a lot of those Ks are. It's okay for them to be mindless and not to be always focused on your goals and what's coming up. I personally have found when I'm too focused, it's more likely that I'm going to be anxious, and being sort of in an anxious frame of mind is not something that can sustain on a day-to-day basis. So I'm very careful on which days I am really focused and which days I'm a little bit more switched off. So the days that I'm more focused are my key workout days. How do I stay focused? I break it down. My coach will send me the workout, or we meet up as a team and we get the workout on the day, or whatever the case may be. And I just break it up into its components. What pace do I have to run here? How far have I got to go? And just tackling it one piece at a time. I coach a few athletes myself, and I sometimes talk about outcome goals and process goals. And your outcome goals are, getting a medal at state championships, or making a Vic team, or making the Olympics. So I've always got those goals. There's a poster just behind the computer where I've got some goals written up at the moment, and I see them on a daily basis. I acknowledge them, but you have to pick and choose when you're really focused, because being focused all the time, I think can be it can potentially be detrimental. That's not to say that I every waking moment of my day and life is certainly geared around making sure that I'm recovering and getting the most out of my runs. But I do all that preparation beforehand. So when I'm actually out there running or training or about to go train, the worry and the anxiety of what I need to do, I can just put aside and get the job done.
That's a very wise answer, and it's certainly shows your experiences shows through that answer. And Arden's come up with a question too, which kind of aligns with this. And he's from Maribyrnong Sports Academy, Maribyrnong College. How would you prepare for a big event in the days leading up to it? Like, what sorts of things do you do? Do you wash your socks a particular way? Do you eat bananas? What do you do to prep?
Yeah, again, probably something that's changed a little bit over the years. And I've been somewhat fortunate, I guess, to race all over the world, and that's also presented some unique challenges in terms of sometimes you go to big events and the things that you're used to aren't necessarily always available or there. So one thing I've learnt to be is to be pretty adaptable. I don't have a particular pre-race meal or things that I subscribe to. I am conscious of making sure that I'm fueling well and eating well and hydrating well, things like that. But I'm doing that most of the time anyway, whether or not it's preparing for a big event. The main differences, I guess, training may be sort of reduced slightly leading up to a big event. So I may taper a little bit. The runs might get a little bit shorter. The workouts may get a little faster but shorter, just to kind of sharpen up. And another important thing is I try to think about what my race plan and what my specific goals are, at least 3 or 4 days beforehand. And whether that's a conversation with my coach or whether it's just sitting down, writing something down, just thinking about it. I like to do that a few days ahead of time and then just kind of tick that box and go, yeah, I've got a plan. And I think that kind of helps with reducing some of the anxiety that can come with getting closer and closer to a race. Now, I'll always be nervous before races, and I think Roger Federer once had a really good quote, which was, if you're not nervous, then you don't care enough to be there. So I think that's certainly true, and so nerves are part of competition and getting ready for races, and I'm okay with that. But I at least try to reduce some of that anxiety about, what's going to happen? What am I going to do? How am I going to run this race? I try and take care of that a few days before, so I can kind of just let it settle and let it marinate, as you will, so that I'm ready on the day of a big event.
Yeah, that sounds. And the quote you just used about Federer, when we interviewed Luke Matthew, he said the same thing. Luke Matthews lives by that quote as well. Now, you who is your coach? I think I know who it is, but I don't want to say just in case. Who is your coach?
So Nick Bideau is my.
I thought it was. Yeah, Nick. What a coach he is! Like your squad is phenomenal. Like both the males and the females. Yeah. I haven't done enough research to make this statement, but I'll say it's my opinion that they've got to be one of the fastest in the nation right now. Like they are such in red hot form. Yeah,
certainly. It's certainly a large proportion of the cream of the crop of distance running in Australia. Not the entire cream of the crop, but certainly a large proportion. And I think that's the product of many years of Nick cultivating a team and a group culture that. Sorry, I've just got my cat going a little crazy in the background there. That's the product of many years of Nick building a team, and I think you look back to the early days. When it was Craig Mottram and Benita Johnson and then later Collis Birmingham, and then it's kind of grown over the years. And I think in Rio, Nick had maybe a total of I think it was either 16 or 18 athletes running in the Rio Olympics, which is pretty phenomenal for one coach.
It is, and what's interesting about that is that for you as an athlete, you don't need to look too far. Your competition on race day is probably within arm's length, or we're not allowed to touch each other at the moment. We're going to stay 1.5 meters apart, but they're within a distance. They're within your crew that you're competing with them, but you're training with them as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's part of what Nick has built. Has built a team of we're all athletes in many respects competing for the same spots and on the same squads, and yet we make the squad work so well together. We get to training sessions, and the sessions are so brutally hard that you've got no choice but to work together and work as part of a team. And that's one of the things that I really love about the group and about what Nick's created is it's a great group dynamic where people work together. Look, I've spent not to name drop too much, but I spent most of the winter training with Stu McSwain. I was probably more at my limits, and Stewie was probably on a Sunday afternoon stroll. But being in an environment like that where you're training with athletes of that caliber on a daily basis, I mean that's probably another reason why I'm still chasing dreams at age 34. I've always got young people to keep me accountable and keep me motivated and keep pushing. So
yeah, that's true. I mean, I love Stu McSwain. He's such a good runner and such a good guy off the track as well. But
absolutely.
I really felt for him and the likes of him and yourself and others when Tokyo was postponed, because he was in the form, I'll say in my opinion, the form of his life. Like he'd run a blistering time at Zatopek. He'd run some crazy times overseas, but it'll just make you guys stronger and go on. Now we've had a question come in from Stefan, who's from Haileybury. What's the average preparation time for a marathon runner? Now, before we get into the question, what's your pet event? Like, what's your distance?
Yeah, so I'm a 5K and 10K specialist, I guess. I haven't run a marathon, but I obviously train with quite a few marathoners, and I'm familiar with the event. So hopefully I can still answer the question. So
yeah, you can't just run 10K every time you want to train. That would be crazy. So what is the preparation time for someone running a 10K distance? Because that's a long way.
Yeah, look, I think you always have to strip it back. You can, for whenever you're preparing for a big event, you traditionally set aside a set period of time where you start to incorporate more and more training elements that more closely reflect what you're actually preparing for. So a more specific. So marathoners would call it their marathon-specific training, and they often will do that for 8 to 12 weeks leading up to a marathon. How long does it take to prepare for a marathon? 8 to 12 weeks? Absolutely not. It's going to take years to prepare for a marathon if you're wanting to do it at a fairly serious elite level. So I guess if you look at some good Aussie marathoners like Brett Robinson and Jack Rayner, they're both Brett's in his late 20s, Jack's in his mid to late 20s, and they've spent years week in, week out, year in, year out, running 120, 130, 140, 160 plus Ks per week, week in, week out. And that doesn't count for nothing. That's kind of the base and I guess the base on which you start to do a marathon build up or a 10K specific build up. That's at least at the elite level. At a junior level, where you're not necessarily preparing for a marathon, but maybe you're preparing for a 1500, a 3K, a 5K. It's a different story. You're at a different point in your physical development. You're younger, you have youth on your side, you recover a lot better, and you're generally on a pretty rapid improvement curve. So the rules change a little bit, and so your preparation might be only a few weeks leading up to a particular race, like a state championships. So it varies. It varies with age. It varies with level of experience, and it varies from event to event.
I mean, that is an interesting answer in itself, and you've named some other people that are fantastic as well in that. A question that's come in from Finn, and Finn's from Spensley Street, and he's asked an interesting question as well, and let's keep this kind of the short-term prospect. How do you motivate yourself to keep running when you feel like you can't run anymore? And what I mean by short-term is when, we're not talking over a period of months, but when you're actually in a race, you're doing a 10K, you've hit, I've heard it talked about, I've never done it myself, but I've heard the wall, heard about the wall. Talk us through what happens, because I'd imagine the mental aspect of your run can sometimes overpower the physical aspect, where your body wants to keep going, but your mind's saying, you need to stop, buddy, or I'm going to, do something here. No question.
And, even all these years later, I still have races where I have these exact problems and these exact negotiations going in my head. Can I stay with this group ahead of me? Can I keep going? Can I maintain this pace? There's a few things. The first is practice, and you have to recognise that for the vast majority of cases, it is a mental battle. You do get to a point in a race, almost every race, where it's just kind of like you get to the tip of the mountain, and all of a sudden it just changes. All of a sudden your body's like, oh, danger! This is not where this is territory I shouldn't be going. But you have to recognise that it is in many respects, in many ways, a mental battle. And the best way to deal with it is through practice. So practicing in training sessions, when you get to a rep and it starts getting really difficult, recognising that point in your training session where it does get difficult, and having that conversation with yourself in your brain, no, I'm going to keep going. And how do you do that? There's a few different ways that I've done it. One, particularly in training, when it starts getting uncomfortable, if I'm like struggling to hold on to the pace, usually what I do is whoever I'm running with, whether it's Geordie Williams or Brett Robinson or any of those guys, and if I'm sitting in behind them, I'll just look at their legs and just follow their legs, follow their cadence. So focus on something external. So we tend to run into trouble when we start thinking internally. So we think about the pain, we think about how uncomfortable everything is. So at that point where you recognise it's getting really hard, start focusing on something external. So in a race, maybe it's the person in front of you, and you're just like, don't let that rubber band expand anymore. Try and maintain that distance with the person in front. And it might be just like one more lap, half a lap, and just keep doing that. But it does take practice.
And the practice you're talking about, I'd imagine, is you put your body through training to hit lactic and push through. Yeah. There's an element where you need to push yourself in that mental aspect as well, because there's an infamous scene that's at least burned into my memory banks when I happened to attend the Common Games in Gold Coast. So I went with my son, and I have a very vivid, I think you know what I'm going to talk about, is the marathon runner who it looked ugly from the outside. I know not every marathon runner goes through that, but you could see the mind and the body were battling it out, and it was just so ugly to watch.
Yeah, and that's probably an extreme example of going almost the entire other way. So that the mind has willed him on much further than he physically probably was capable of doing, and they were unique circumstances, and it was hot. It was sunny. It was humid. It was late in the morning. It was a marathon.
Well, that's what I was about to say, is that you could train yourself in Victorian conditions to just, do the run and hit that wall.
Yeah.
But surely weather, diet, sleep, all play a factor in that. You can train all you like and hit, I'm just going to say for argument's sake, you might hit that wall in Victoria at the 8K out of 10K mark.
Yeah.
But in the heat, it might come at 3, and does it blindside you like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very good point. And these are all factors that preclude any sort of mental battles that you get to. And at the end of the day, you're only as good as your preparation, and whether that's your actual running training, your diet, how well hydrated you are, how well prepared you are for the particular conditions that you're running in. For many viewers here, it might be a case of, and perhaps not this year, but you live in Victoria in pretty mild temperatures, and then you get to go to a nationals. Maybe it's up in Queensland, and it's a whole lot hotter and conditions that you're not used to. So all things that need to be considered when you're getting ready for a race.
And that's the sort of stuff is really hard to prep for, because you just mentioned before your first Team Vic, I think you said, was in Queensland, but we send the kids to WA, which is hot, Northern Territory, blistering hot, Queensland, obviously, and then Tassie, the opposite. It's freezing down in Tassie. It's different, so different conditions create different environments, I guess.
Yeah, and a lot of the time, the conditions and how we prepare for them are out of our hands. We can't control whether it's a windy day or a hot day. Sometimes we're going to be fortunate enough that we can prepare for hot conditions. Sometimes we're not going to be able to do that. We're just going to be thrown in the deep end. But we need to. There's an opportunity to recognise, what might be challenging. I think it's also important to recognise that everyone's in the same boat. So everyone's dealing with, maybe it's windy conditions, wet conditions, hot conditions. So they're sort of some of the factors that are potentially out of our control. Factors that are within our control are our diet and making sure that we're well fueled before races. I've certainly in the past made errors around how much I should be eating the day before. I typically, for a long time, I thought, I'm only doing 5K, 10K. I'm never going to be hitting a wall like a marathoner. It's not as important. As long as I, eat a pretty balanced diet, I'll be okay. But then, I've more recently been much more particular about, having a higher carbohydrate in the days before and noticing a big difference in my consistency on race day. So things like that. And it's going to be different for everyone. And I think the bottom line is they're all factors that you should think about. You don't have to get it right the first time. Some of these things can take many races, many years to fine tune. But they're the sort of things that you should think about, reassess after each race, what worked, what didn't, what can we do better. I love your answer, because I think what I'll draw out of your answer that maybe wasn't as clear to some of the younger folk that will be watching this later is that you're still learning. You've mentioned your age, so I can mention again 34. You didn't get it right as a 12 or 15-year-old kid. You've still continued to learn. And absolutely. I think that's important as an athlete, that athletes just take themselves off themselves out of the naughty corner and stop punishing themselves for doing things, because that's a learning curve and a learning experience because you've, let's face it, you've been in Uganda, you've been in Poland, you've been to all over Australia. You've travelled in lots of conditions, and there would have been a learning curve that came with the territory in terms of where you were competing, right? Yeah, absolutely. And you made a good point. Is I'm 34 and I'm still learning these lessons, and admittedly, I still make some of the same mistakes that I've been making for 10 years. And it's always something I try to do better. And, it gets a lot harder as you get older, and you kind of, your gains and your improvements become so much more marginal. So, at my age and at the level that I'm at, I can't aim for a personal best every time I race. So there's different things that I'm aiming for. I might be aiming to be more competitive, to position better at a particular race rather than the time. And so because my approach, because the conditions change, where I'm racing, what I'm racing changes, the lessons never stop. You're always in a slightly different scenario each time you line up. And I think recognizing that, and, if you have a bad race, or you do something, you make a mistake, or you do something that you later recognize you could have done better, that's fine. It's part of racing. No one races the same, so you can't expect to get it perfectly right every time, because it's always going to be a little bit different, and there are always going to be those uncontrollable factors.
Yeah, very true.
How good your competitor's going to run. You can have an absolutely stellar race, and your competitors just happen to have an even more stellar race.
That must be very frustrating.
It is, but I think back to the start of the year, we did we had a race around the Tan, and I ran a huge PB. And I look back on it now, and I'm like absolutely chuffed with it. But at the time, I was like, I still got beaten by 3-4 people, and I was like, I wanted to, get a slightly better position, and so look, there's always there's always going to be the temptation to focus so much on what didn't go well, what could be done better, but just make sure that you do celebrate the things that do go well. That's important.
That's very true. Before we get into the couple of last questions, I just want to pick up on something you said before, that almost every race you get that mental wall. Is that true for a runner who's a 5 and a 10K runner? Even when you're running a 1500 or a 3K, does that wall still come?
I think so. Yeah, and it'll come in different ways, and then of course you'll have races where it doesn't come, and they're the ones where something magic happens, and you change gears, and you fly past your competitors, and you have a great race. So look, it does vary, and certainly I guess all these years later, and I guess the caliber of people that I tend to be racing against, it usually does get challenging, and a lot of the time I'm racing against the people that I'm training with, and I know for sure that they're always going to be tough races, because I train with some pretty tough runners. But look, it's like I said, it's that sort of that difficult point in the race, that difficult point in your training session. It can come at different times. Sometimes it won't come. But you should always be prepared for it, and have a strategy of how am I going to get through this, and how am I going to try and maintain and be competitive, even when my body's telling me to slow down.
Now, just changing tact a little bit as we finish off, how has sport set you up for life in general?
Yeah, good question. Not an easy answer. I'm 34. I've done a few different things outside of running. When I finished year 12 back in 2004, I went to uni. I started a physio degree, got a year and a half in, and wasn't sure it was for me. I then went to the US. I went on a college scholarship and ran there. I did a bachelor's and a master's there, and then finished my master's. Like, I don't know if this is really for me either, but the one constant for me was always running. So running was always the thing that I loved. Is now, always will be, no matter what level I'm running at. And so I think probably 5-6 years ago, I was asking myself this question. I'd finished 2.5 degrees at this point. I was like, where am I going? What am I doing? And I just realized, well, running's what I love. I love being part of that community. I love being with runners, working with runners. And so I made a decision to go back to physiotherapy because I saw it as an opportunity to stay involved in the sport. So what has running done for me? It's certainly it shapes a large part of my identity and what I love. It shapes, I guess, the direction I've kind of set for my life. It won't always be as a competitive runner, but in some way, shape, or form, it will always be part of what I do. And even now, as I guess, kind of a little bit at that transition point where I'm sort of a physio and a runner, it's giving me a unique opportunity to straddle both sides of the running world. So it's it's the gift that keeps giving for me.
And what an amazing journey, like you mentioned, you've been on. You've got now a double degree and a master's in
Exercise science.
Exercise science, sorry. Yep, exercise science, that's right. And, that is quite remarkable with all the achievements that we talked about at the start of the year to this. It's interesting. I work for the Department of Education and Training, so it's difficult to give all my opinion around it, but I think sometimes we push kids into a cookie cutter mentality that you must know what you're doing in the future when you're 13 or 14, and that mustn't move. But yet at the same time, I don't know any adult between the age of 30 to 60 that has stayed in that one job and sought that one. Now they're probably out there, but the vast majority do chop and change and find themselves and redefine who they are, and therefore their values change and their morals in some ways change, and they keep going into exploring what life might be, and job satisfaction is so important, right?
Absolutely. Look, we make decisions at every point of our lives, and from an education standpoint, we make decisions. When we go from year 10 to a year 11, or from year 6 to year 7, we choose what subjects we want to do, and just like the subjects you choose in year 7 or 8, or just like the subjects you choose in year 11 or 12, or just like the university course, the TAFE course, the apprenticeship you decide you want to do after you finish year 12. None of these decisions are forever. They can be, but it's okay. It's okay if you don't really know what you want to do. I still, I have a better sense of the direction I want to go, but I certainly haven't figured it all out. And, it was probably only sort of 5 years ago that I decided physio is what I wanted to do. And so I went and did that. I'm sure that will change in some way, shape or form. I'm working in a private practice at the moment, and in another 5-10 years, who knows what I'll be doing. But I think the bottom line is and particularly for people in year 12, and I remember having to make decisions about well, 1, do I want to go to university, and 2, what do I want to study, and 3, what marks do I need to do this, and 4, am I going to get these marks to get into this course? And I think I hope I'm an example that 1, if you don't know what you want to do, that's okay. 2, if you don't get the marks that you need to do what you want to do, that's also okay. 3, if you go into something, you get into it, and then decide after 6 months it's not for you, that's also okay. there's plenty of time, and also at the end of the day, if there's anything I can, any sort of wisdom I can push forward is choose something that you love. Don't worry about what your parents think. I mean, worry about what your parents think, of course, but at the end of the day, the older you get, the more and more the decisions you make are for yourself. And when you're finishing high school, that's one of the first decisions you're making. And it certainly doesn't have to be the last. But always have in the back of your mind, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? Who do I want to do it with? And let those sorts of questions guide, the decisions you make.
That desire is very important. Like we've talked about, that love for the sport and desire to train and compete is important. It's also important in education. And interesting, you chose physiotherapy and then you walked away from it. And it wasn't until that you went to the USA and I didn't mention that you actually have 2 NCAA titles as well. You found yourself and then thought, no, I really want to do physiotherapy. So I'm imagining David McNeill, before he enjoyed it, it was just a chore. I just have to get this done. It's a grind. Yeah. When you decided, no, I want to do this, it would have probably taken a lot of the grind away. Not that you absolutely love studying, but there would have been a level of it's not too hard anymore.
Absolutely. And look, I think that raises a few things. One is, whatever you do in life, there will be times where it is a grind. There's times where it's a grind as an athlete. There's times where it's a grind as a physio. But I think that the thing that changed was that between when I first started a physio degree after high school, and then when I went back and did a physio degree in 2017, was I had a vision at this point. So I had a vision of where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do with it. And I probably didn't have that the first time around. So it helps to have some idea about just larger scale questions, not like, do I want to be a carpenter or a nurse or work in retail or anything like that. But like, what's your purpose? What do you want to? What makes you happy? Who are the sort of people that you want to be around? Asking those questions is a good prelude to making decisions about, what particular field might that fit into.
That's fantastic. Now we've run out of time. I reckon that we could talk for another hour and a half, and you could give lots of tips to those listening, and we really love that. And look, we just want to say, School Sport Victoria, really proud of the fact that you have come through our pathway through cross country as an itty bitty short little boy. You're not short anymore, and now going on to bigger and better things. And you've got 2 Olympics and 2 Com Games, or nearly 3 Com Games under your belt. You've got one that you're focusing on in Tokyo, and we want to wish you all the best. And we really believe that you are going to put everything into it, and we're going to continue to champion your cause in the journey to Tokyo 2021 or 22. Who knows when it's going to be?
Yeah, who knows? But yeah, thanks, Raf, and thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks for the questions. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions through social media and stuff. I'm always happy to say good day and answer a question.
Well, we put the we put your Instagram account in the show notes so people can tune in there. But we will get on board and continue to champion you like we've said, and good luck for the future.
Thanks, Raf. See you guys.
See ya.